Hello, my name is Joshua Keith, and this is theburningcoal.com, a website dedicated to God's glory, His grace, and our response to it. Today we're going to do a Monday motivation, and it's actually going to be the start of a series on these Monday motivations where we're going to talk about the Beatitudes. Now, Matthew chapter 5 gives us the beginning of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. And really, what Jesus is talking about here is how to be in the kingdom. And the very first thing that he teaches about, the very first thing that he tells us is, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." So we need to understand that if we want to be a part of God's kingdom, if we want to be with Him and we want to take advantage of having a relationship with God, then we need to have this idea of being poor in spirit. Well, what does that mean? First of all, it means that we are spiritually bankrupt. We have nothing to offer God. And we need to understand that. That's something that we need to come to terms with. A lot of times we like to view righteousness as something that we can offer before God so that way He can enjoy being in a relationship with us. But that's not the situation at all. The truth of the matter is that God created us so that we could be in a relationship with Him. But then we went and ruined it. And so because of that, we became spiritually bankrupt. We became spiritually dead. And if we want to rebuild the relationship with God, the very first thing that we have to acknowledge is that simple truth. Without it, we won't humble ourselves to go before Him. We will instead think of ourselves as not really needing God. Maybe it's nice to be in a relationship with God. Maybe if I have time, if God really wants the relationship, then I'll let Him be my companion. But it's not that we need God. When we understand that we are spiritually bankrupt, that we are poor, then that causes us to rely on God. Because this is something we cannot fix. One of the things about our American culture is that we idolize the mindset of being able to go from nothing to something. And this idea that, well, if you just work hard enough, you can be successful. You can do anything you put your mind to. But one thing we need to understand is that there is not a thing we can do to pay back the debts that we owe God. There's not a way where we can fix this spiritual bankruptcy on our own, where we can earn enough to no longer be poor in spirit. There is not a way that we can make this up. And so we need to come to terms with that. And that causes us to fully and truly rely on God. We need to take time to step back and to go to God and say, "Lord, I am a mess. I have messed up my life. I am a sinner. Help me. Help me to do better. Help me to be your servant. Help me to be more like you." Because if we think that we don't need to be fixed, if we think that we are rich, then we won't rely on God. Instead, we choose to rely on ourselves. But nothing can be gained by that. Salvation does not come from anything that we can do. It only comes from the Lord. And so, as Christians, we need to make sure that we don't become arrogant. One of the things that wound up happening to the Pharisees is that they knew the law. And as we see later in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says that your righteousness has to exceed that of the Pharisees. What do you mean by that? Well, there's lots of things. But from this perspective, what we're talking about with being poor in spirit, they did not recognize their need for God. They thought that because they knew God so well, that they didn't have to submit, that they didn't have to be humble, that they didn't have to lean on God for everything. And if we're not careful, we can become arrogant in our faith, in our righteousness, in our deeds. Let us never forget that we are indeed poor in spirit. I hope this lesson blesses you in your walk in His kingdom.